Good evening, everyone. I hope you are doing well. You may be watching this video this evening or catching up to it because we are in the middle of Vacation Bible School this week, and so it is definitely a busy week, but thankfully God is blessing us in a mighty way so far. We've had 121, 124, and 125, I believe, for our attendance this week, and so we'll see how tonight goes and tomorrow night goes, and we'll go from there. But nevertheless, I hope everybody is enjoying it. Tonight we're going to pick up back over into chapter 5 of the book of Daniel. This evening we're going to be looking mainly reading verses, 10 through 24 if I'm not mistaken here. And so that's going to be our passage of scripture this evening. We're going to be looking at a lot of different things, but tonight's going to be a little different. Instead of giving kind of like just points as we go through kind of thing, I'm just going to leave the text up on and I'm just going to make kind of the comments going through. Mainly just because verses 10 through 24 is just kind of a little bit of a summation, a little bit of a recap of a lot of things we've already looked at, and I feel weird just skipping over it, and so we're just going to kind of gradually work our way through those 14, 15 verses there, and then kind of begin to move on from there. But this evening, as we jump off into Daniel chapter 5, we are looking at the next half of what takes place after they see the writing on the wall and all of these things begin to transpire and take place. And so tonight we'll start off and we'll kind of break it down a little bit of a section by section here. But in essence, we begin in verse 10 by saying, "Because of the outcry of the king and his nobles, the queen came to the banquet hall, and may the king live forever. She said, 'Don't let your thoughts terrify you or your face be pale. There is a man in your kingdom who has the spirit of the holy gods in him. In the days of your predecessor, he was found to have insight, intelligence, and wisdom like the wisdom of the gods. Your predecessor, King Nebuchadnezzar, appointed him chief over of the diviners, mediums, Chaldeans, and astrologers, and your own predecessor, the king, did this because Daniel, the king named Belteshazzar, was found to have an extraordinary spirit, knowledge, and perception, and the ability to interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve problems. Therefore, summon Daniel, and he will give the interpretation." So, one of the big questions right now is, okay, in verse 10 there, the queen came to the banquet hall. With that being the case, the question kind of becomes right now, who is the king? So, the answer is probably the wife of Nabonidus, who was actually more than likely the daughter of Nebuchadnezzar. So all of these things kind of coming through there again, how they view things versus how we view things are completely different in that regard. But nevertheless, that is more than likely that is the answer to what exactly is going on right here in verse 10 whenever the queen comes to the banquet hall. So of course, as you begin to kind of, parse out this verse and figure out what exactly is happening and taking place, the real question out of Belshazzar at the moment is, why is he not thinking about Daniel? Why is he not considering who Daniel is and everything else? Well, more than likely there's a couple of different answers. One, he was so inebriated that he could not think. But secondly, it had been 23 years since the death of Nebuchadnezzar. So right now, kind of thinking through the time gap and everything else, there's I don't want to say a point of retirement, but there's more than likely a place to where Daniel is kind of working off the scene right now in terms of his age and just his functionality and his purpose within the kingdom. More than likely that's what you're seeing right now. And again, I would say, just to give you kind of a little bit of a chronological understanding here, consider back to the book of Jeremiah chapter 29 whenever you start to read about this 70-year captivity. So if you think, about 70 years, to which we're not fully quite there yet, but then you also go back to chapter 1 and some of those first lessons that we had, Daniel was around 14 years old. I would say keep that in mind, that right now, as we're thinking about Daniel chapter 5 here, you're thinking Daniel's probably in the neighborhood of around 80 years old, roughly. So let that kind of set in for a minute, okay? We're not quite to the point of being able to, go from the Babylonian kingdom over into the Medes and the Persians, but we're right on the cusp and right on the brink of it. And there again, even for this chapter, to set up the events of chapter 6, don't forget, Daniel chapter 6, a lot of times we think of Daniel as this young boy in the lion's den. No, Daniel was about 85 years old or so, 85 years old whenever he was tossed into the lion's den. But nevertheless, as we kind of think through this passage, he wants to summon all of the astrologers. We've seen that on and on, off and on again, throughout the course of the chapters and everything, but nevertheless, this kind of sets up, the idea that they are, as the end says there, summon Daniel, and he will give the interpretation. Then we go into verses 13 through 16. It says, "Then Daniel was brought before the king, and the king said to him, 'Are you Daniel, one of the Judean exiles, or one of the Israelites, that my predecessor the king brought from Judah? I've heard that you have the spirit of the gods in you, and that you have insight, intelligence, and extraordinary wisdom. Now the wise men and mediums were brought before me to read this inscription and make its interpretation known to me, but they could not give its interpretation. However, I have heard about you, that you can give interpretations and solve problems. Therefore, if you can read this inscription and give me its interpretation, you will be clothed in purple, have a gold chain around your neck, and have the third highest position in the kingdom.'" So at this point, most likely Belshazzar is fearful of Daniel because he had pretty much just blasphemed the God that Daniel worshipped. So there's kind of an interaction, an altercation going on right now of where there's, I don't want to say dared a point of humility here, but there is kind of a humbling that is taking place of, I need to tread lightly as we begin to move on into what is to come next. So in verse 17, whenever we read, "Then Daniel answered the king, 'You may keep your gifts and give your rewards to someone else. However, I will read the inscription for you, the king, and make the interpretation known to him.'" So more than likely, Daniel's refusing these gifts because there's potentially a couple of different things, okay? He didn't want Belshazzar thinking that, God's service could be bought. That's the last thing you want to do, is imply or implicate this idea of, hey, you can buy off God if you provide enough different things or pay off His people. It doesn't work like that. Plus this could have allowed Daniel to say, there's no allegiance between you and I. Like, you're you, I'm me. I'm 80 years old. My life has ran its course. Like, I can't be bought anymore. Like, I'll give you the interpretation because you're the king, but it is what it is. Don't throw a fit. Don't cry here in a little bit whenever it all unfolds before you. I done this with your dad, with your grandfather. They didn't learn. More than likely, you're not going to learn. Time has ran its course. So, more or less, he says, "Your Majesty," there in verse 18, "the Most High God gave me sovereignty, greatness, glory, and majesty to your predecessor Nebuchadnezzar. Because of the greatness he gave him, all peoples, nations, and languages were terrified and fearful of him. And he killed anyone he wanted and kept alive anyone he wanted. And he exalted anyone he wanted and humbled anyone he wanted." So Daniel's probably giving Belshazzar something to reflect on here. Basically, this is what the time past looked like. This is a point of evaluation. Stop and consider, stop and think about what even you potentially grew up in. Because there's a very high probability that Belshazzar is, there again, yes, he's inebriated, but more than likely he grew up hearing these things, potentially even seeing some of these things. So this isn't news to him. It's just kind of, he's sobering up real quick and in a hurry right now. But obviously, God is the only one who is able to help. He removed the kingdom from Nebuchadnezzar, and now he is about to remove the kingdom from Belshazzar. But notice what Daniel says here in verse 20. But when his heart was exalted and his spirit became arrogant, he was deposed from his royal throne, and his glory was taken from him. He was driven away from people. His mind was like the animals. He lived with the wild donkeys, and he was fed grass like cattle. And his body was drenched with dew from the sky until he acknowledged that the Most High God is ruler over the kingdom of men and sets anyone he wants over it. So, here, again, kind of this further point of contemplation is stopping to say, Belshazzar, what's going on here? What do you really think you're going to accomplish? What is really going to happen on the other side? You think you're setting yourself for one thing, but it's not going to happen that way. It's not going to go well for you on that side. And so here in verses 20 and 21, it's plain and simple. This was the stories of old. This is what happened just, several years ago. It's not even that far out of date. But, hey, it did not go well. And now you're beginning to walk through and down those same exact paths. And, and I think that's what's so funny about it is it's like, even in the writing of Daniel, you can see the maturity growing in Daniel, but I think there comes a place into which, everybody enjoys. The older you get, is kind of the less filter you have, and you just kind of say whatever's on your mind because you're coming to a place where it's like, I've been on this ride so long, I know what's coming. And yet, here's pretty much Daniel just laying it out like, okay, let me make this make sense. 2 + 2 = 4. Your grandfather did it, your dad did it, you're going to do it. Like, there's no hope for y'all. I'm going to give you the answer. I'm going to, shoot straight with you right here. But let's be honest. This is what it is. This is how it's happening. He did this and you're just going to follow in the same footsteps. And here in a few years, it's all going to be over with. I'm going to be dead and gone and we'll be all right. There's a very plain cut and dry reality to Daniel in his older age to where it's just, guys, this is it. Accept it, reject it, I don't care. Here it is. Grill it up and eat it. I'm going back to sleep. It's just kind of it's a funny thing to think through as far as just how direct even Daniel is right now in these moments with Belshazzar as they're just formally meeting, but, having this interaction. He says in verse 22, but your successor, Belshazzar, his successor, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, even though you knew all of this. Instead, you have exalted yourself against the Lord of heaven. The vessels from his house were brought to you, and your nobles, wives, and concubines drank wine from them. You praised the gods made of silver and gold, bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which do not see or hear or understand, but you have not glorified the God who holds your life breath in his hand, and who controls the whole course of your life. Therefore he sent the hand, and this writing was inscribed. I just want to pause real quickly at the, kind of the end of verse 23 there. The God who holds your life breath in his hand. I mean, that's powerful. Stop and consider what Belshazzar, is hearing now in this moment from Daniel. You may think you're the king. You may think you're the ruler. But Belshazzar, guess what? You are nothing in comparison to God. That may, burst your bubble a little bit. It may make you a little upset, but there again, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what you think or what you want. It doesn't work that way. And so, all of this, not just from a kingdom or earthly standpoint, but Daniel is acknowledging that other side of it, that Belshazzar, there's something even beyond that place, that point of life. Like, kingdoms are one thing, but life is adhered to and held to by God in his very hand. In his hand, who controls the whole course of your life. There again, it's just a brief pause and a moment of saying, Belshazzar, you got the chance. You've still got an opportunity to an extent, but get your head right. Sometimes, and I think it behooves us to consider, even as a point of application, sometimes that's what we need. We need somebody to look us dead in the eye and say, Casey, you're about to make a dumb decision. Thankfully, I've had several people, that have come alongside of me or said, hey, this may not go well. Now, sometimes you listen, sometimes you don't, and it goes one way or another. But still, we need, and hear me out, not only for our lives, but to be friends, I would say true friends to other people in their lives. It comes down to this side of saying, do I want to just tickle your ear? Or do I want to be real with you and be honest? We don't need friends to, just keep filling our minds full of nonsense or, unrealistic expectations. We need sometimes people to be real with us and say, hey, this ain't going to work out well. You may not realize it, but there's a brick wall right in front of you and you're about to smack it like you've never smacked it before. You are about to go down. Sometimes we need those kinds of people in our lives. Not only to help humble us, but just in general, to be a warning, a point of guidance and wisdom. I would encourage you. Maybe that's what you need in your life. You don't need the people to gossip with you. You need people to be real and honest with you. Maybe that's what you need. But as well, maybe that's what you need to be for somebody else. As somebody that will just shoot straight and, hey, it's an idea, but I don't know if I'd do it like that. Sometimes we need, other ideas, because here's the crazy thing. I've learned, and I'm 34, I wouldn't say I'm old or anything, but, I've learned in my time in ministry and in my, and just in general in the age group of just saying, like, I don't always know what I'm doing or what the smartest decisions are, I guess, in a roundabout way. But you know what I've learned to find? People that I can trust that'll be real and honest with me. That'll give me, kind of a parameter or bounds to stay within, so to speak. Or, because there's some people, I'd say they probably think that I can, I can tell Casey and he'll listen to me and I'm like, you may think you can, but you're not. There are people that I trust, obviously more than others. Others, sometimes it's you let it go in one ear and out the other. But there are others that I consider and I value their thoughts and their inclinations, where they're coming from. Because so often in my life, God has used a lot of people to speak life into me, and it didn't come directly from not necessarily God to me myself, but in my own ways, in my own stubbornness, I was too blinded to see. And so God is able to use and will use other people like Daniel to get a hold of your heart or to speak life into you. But maybe that's what you need to be, or what you need to clean up and clear out in your life, is just having people that you're able to talk to that can actually speak wisdom into you. But next week we'll pick up with the obvious breakdown of what exactly the writing on the wall looked like, and begin to just let all that unfold. But nevertheless, I hope you have a great and wonderful rest of your week. Continue to pray for VBS that we can finish out strong tomorrow evening. But like anything else, if you need anything, let me know. But otherwise, we'll see y'all next week. Thank you, guys.